Hello, all. Welcome to today's episode of Couchonomics with Arjun. I'm your host, Arjun. Joining me today, all the way from Kuwait, is Ali Abulhasan, who is the founder and CEO of Tap Payments. Ali, welcome to the show. Welcome
Thank
to
you.
the couch.
Thank you, Arjun.
Right? Well, I must thank you. You've made all the way from Kuwait.
Of course.
Right. It's not that far.
It's not that far, and I do visit Dubai pretty often.
You do, and you have a business here already. And I met met members of your team, including the gentleman who's going to be running
Yes.
the UAE business. But I've got to be honest with you. You are the first Kuwaiti-born fintech that I've actually had the opportunity to meet formally on the couch.
And I hope I can represent Kuwaiti startups or fintechs in a positive way, since I'm the first one, and hopefully you would meet others also.
So the way this works is, Ali, it's a conversation, right?
Yeah.
And we're gonna go on a bit of a journey,
Yeah.
right? And this journey is going to be all about Tap Payments
Yeah.
and you as their founder and your team. And it's a no hold bar conversation. So feel comfortable with whatever you'd like to share. My whole intention here is that let's make this engaging. And let's just make sure that people really understand what Tap Payments is all about and where you guys heading, right? So we have about 45 to 50 minutes.
Yeah.
We usually always blow that time limit, but I usually try and keep it to 45 to 50 minutes. We've got a lot to go through. So why don't we dive straight in, right? And I guess my first question to you is, what was the genesis behind Tap Payments?
I would put it in two ways, or I think two phases. First, I realized before starting with Tap that I knew how to help friends who were looking to set up online payment acceptance in Kuwait. And what was a challenging part in Kuwait is that we have a debit network and we have the credit card networks.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge was the integrations of both were not unified. They're two separate integration flows, experiences, and setups where it takes an average of a person or a company to enable payments from 3 months to a year at the time. That was back in 2012, 13.
And you're talking specifically about e-commerce payments.
E-commerce payments in Kuwait. That was, let's say, a point where it kind of triggered, why is it that way? Why can't it be simpler?
Which is going to be my question. Why was it going to take a year?
Because typically banks at the time, who were the providers of such payment services, and they still do, but at the time it was only banks, basically had a very low risk appetite of enabling first debit cards, which would take a few months because they're not technically or technology savvy with their clients.
Okay.
And then they need to see transactions for around 6 months until they decide to enable credit cards, which is another integration also and a decision. And you know how it works within banks. It takes a long time. So it takes a very big period for companies to accept online payments. And for startups and SMEs, a month makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
They need the cash liquidity to fuel their growth.
Not many of them have a 12-month runway.
Exactly. And the goal was from the beginning was to bring it down to 48 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we achieved. We unified acceptance of debit and credit cards in Kuwait, which were KNet, Visa, MasterCard, and American Express, all enabled in a single integration within 48 hours. That was the start. But I believe the second point was what inspired the true, let's say, aim or ambition, what we want to do with Tap Payments. We're in a region that is very fragmented. And any company that's based out of the region would like to grow into neighboring countries.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is it easy to grow and evolve? it is a big hassle. And that's another complex problem that we wanted to focus on.
Yeah, multi-jurisdictions, different regulators,
Exactly.
Talent, etc., etc.
Exactly. And that's what we wanted to do, is how we can unify the technology piece and the handling of funds in a protective manner while being regulated in an approved way in every country, and how we can bring it all together into a single relationship. So the challenge here was there is a huge potential of the region. We're very big with, let's say, strong purchase power, very tech savvy, high internet penetration. Everybody is highly banked, yet it's still very hard for companies to accept payments in the region.
I have a view, at least in the UAE, that I say we're overbanked and underserved.
True. It is true.
The statistics are quite clear.
True. The GCC in particular is very much highly banked. Is it? And you would say in the UAE, at least, I would say, till very recently, debit cards were not even enabled online.
Yep.
And now even the behavior of paying with your debit card in the UAE is not a common practice. Where the neighboring countries, they're all debit card oriented. So it's very important to understand how the behavior of consumers are. And this is not known for most entrepreneurs. So an entrepreneur that comes out of the UAE thinks how the market behavior is based on their consumer behavior living in the UAE.
Which is different.
Which is very different in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, Qatar, and Oman. Even in Jordan, Lebanon. The whole region is very much different. One country from another. Yet we're so close to each other. So the real potential of the region is not yet reached till now.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of complexity which needs to be managed. But I'm going to take you back a little bit in your time, right? So you were actually helping, as you said, friends and businesses who wanted to get online initially before you launched tap payments, right? And you said it was taking anywhere between 3 months to a year before they could get their debit card and then their credit card, right? So what encouraged you to say that if I come into the market, I can actually change the attitude among the bankers to move faster, right? And I really would like to hear the war stories that led to the establishment of tap payments, because you've taken something which took a year to something which now is taking days.
Yeah.
Right? You're still working with the same banks.
True.
Right? Arguably the same people in the banks.
True.
So how did you go about it? Because let's be honest, were you the first person to think about it?
We were the first company that offered that in Kuwait. And in the region, we were amongst the first. The same time, the year or two, because if you look at, there was a company that started in Saudi 2014, 15, another one based out of UAE that got acquired, and another one that started in the UAE, now is a global company. So you have a lot that's coming out from the region. Each company came with a different angle. What triggered it is I was probably in a time in my life, I would say, that I really wanted to do something that had a purpose. I don't know why, to be honest. And it hits probably I assume every guy or any person who hits their late 20s maybe. They just want to do something that is impactful. You don't know what you want to do. I actually did a lot of different businesses in the beginning. I failed in some, lucky with tap, I would say. And I've always had a passion towards payments for some reason. When friends came to me to help them with payment enablement online, they didn't come to me just because it's payments, and it just was like, oh, let's just check, can you assist here? And it happened to be that I have done it before I wasn't an expert. I've just
Okay.
done it before. I've never worked in a bank, but I work very closely with banks. So I've been in payments almost all my career. The first job I worked was, ironically, in payments, but it was not part of the banking sector. It was in a closed loop payment network,
All right.
which exposed me into how the payment landscape is. I actually wanted to leave payments. Tap brought me back into payments.
Okay. All right.
So
That's interesting. That's interesting. But let me just put you on the spot here, right? So you decided I'm gonna start Tap Payments. I'm gonna start in Kuwait. I'm gonna solve a big problem. What were the 3 biggest challenges that you overcame or you faced?
yeah. So number one, trust.
Trust the banking people trusting you, or the
whole
businesses?
the whole
The whole ecosystem.
the whole ecosystem.
Okay.
Keep in mind at the time there isn't a provider that offers payment services other than a bank.
Yep.
So who are you to come in and offer such services? That's one. So you need to gain trust, build on that. Second is funding. Funding at the time, basically the ecosystem, the venture capital ecosystem was not yet developed.
Not at all.
I even learned the word angel investor after starting Tap.
Starting a business.
Starting a business. Basically, that was another second part. A third part would be the awareness and understanding the role of what a payment company at the time. The word fintech was not commonly used, but what was the role of a payment company or a fintech in relation to the existing stakeholders of the industry? And how do you build that awareness? How do you build that education with no references that are out there? Everyone who thinks of payments at the time was thinking of companies like PayPal, basically. And when you think of anything, you think consumer, where we started in enabling payments for companies.
Right.
And enabling online payments. So it's a niche that not a lot were comprehending. Online payments at the time was still new in the region. It was actually advanced in Kuwait, but still new in the region.
Okay.
Because the first online payment transaction that was performed in Kuwait was around the year 2000.
Okay.
So that was the time, way ahead of other markets. Like, I'll give you another example. The first online transaction done on a local network in Saudi was in 2018.
Wow. Okay. Didn't know that. That's an interesting fact. You live and learn.
That's 18 years, and see where Saudi is today. It's way advanced with technology and with financial inclusion.
It's an interesting take. What was the discussion like with the central bank in Kuwait at that time when you launched?
Being the first is important. Let me do that again. Being the first and offering a service that is not the norm in the market,
which nobody knows about,
doesn't mean that you want to always highlight it straightforward unless it's in a developed environment. So regulations was not yet developed at the time.
Okay.
Licensing in Kuwait, surprisingly, became formalized for payment companies just in 2021.
Wow. Okay.
So we are actually the first regulator who licensed us officially was Saudi Arabia, SAMA, Saudi Central Bank.
Which was in 2018.
That was in 2018, late 2018 into the sandbox.
Right.
Officially in 2020. Yes, during COVID.
Okay.
We also had, during that period, a regulatory license from Central Bank of Bahrain. But it's also very important to highlight, even though the Central Bank of Kuwait established their regulatory licensing framework officially in 2021, 2022, we had an open dialogue to allow payment companies to operate. So that's a very
That's
important...
the question I was going to ask you. But you obviously were in communication, constant communication, because at the end of the day, you're positioning yourself in a very important part of how the money flows.
True. And it's very important that a regulator has visibility into all of such activities.
Super essential.
So what we did initially is we always had a bank with us to make sure that there is a trusted party communicating either on our behalf or collaboratively. And we've done that in Kuwait, we've done that in UAE, we've done that in Qatar, we've done that in Oman and in Egypt. So what we have been investing a lot from the beginning is how we can operate in a market that is yet evolving in regulations, and how we can position ourselves in a manner where the regulator respects and sees that, well, we're preparing ourselves. There's a company that we're willing to work with. Because if you neglect all of that, you can't continue. It's not only about disruptive technology. It's about innovating within your regulatory environment.
Totally agree with you. Now, so Ali, but that begs the question, right? So you've been at it for a while, and you've been at it in a number of markets, right? So two-part question, right? And I want an unvarnished answer from you, okay? What is your reading of the current state of what we call fintech in the region, right? Second part of the question, right? And I'd rather just say the second part because I think second is subset, which is if you look at payments, which is quite an integral part of fintech, and as a matter of fact, has been the catalyst of fintech in this part of the world to a large extent. What makes payments in the markets that you mentioned, GCC and some of the North African countries, different to what you have experienced or seen in other parts of the world?
I'll start with the first one.
Please.
I'll give you an example of an experience I've had, if you want to talk about fintech and how it is in the region. First, it changes from one country to another.
Yeah.
Extremely. Mm-hmm. It changes. So let's say I'm going to start with Saudi.
Okay.
It's common for me, and it happened to me twice, where I would sit with an Uber driver, and the Uber driver is talking to me about fintech.
Okay.
That gives you a sense of how the term fintech became mainstream.
Okay.
What does that mean? It means that there are a lot of companies or a lot of entrepreneurs that are looking into this vertical. And a lot of startups call themselves fintechs today. And many are moving towards that. It's a positive thing because you have a lot that's happening, but the long term is what is going to define where fintech is going to go, at least in markets like Saudi.
Okay.
There are other markets where, when you mention fintech, in the GCC, I don't want to mention the countries' names,
fair enough,
where they don't even understand what it is. And that's in the GCC alone. So, and those countries are so close to each other. So we're in a region that's very much, I would say, bipolar from a fintech perspective. Where very advanced in one way and the opposite in another way, not because it's not advanced, it's maybe the terminology is not yet developed.
Yes. So let before you answer the payments question, right? So I have a view, but before I share the view, I want to ask the question: why do you think that's the case? So why does an Uber driver sitting in Riyadh or driving in Riyadh understands the word fintech, right? And why doesn't the same, a different person in the same occupation in a different part of the GCC doesn't register that word. What's different?
Well, I think
why this bipolar why this bipolar state?
basically we need to really give acknowledgement to the leadership in Saudi,
Okay.
especially with Vision 2030 and what has been invested into the different goals in Vision 2030. It defines a lot of ambitions. One of those is financial inclusion.
It is.
And the structure that has been put from the regulator to the operator to the enabler in Saudi Arabia has played a huge role, from SAMA to basically Saudi payments to Fintech Saudi and of course the CMA. All of those and how they've been collaboratively building awareness. Fintech Saudi has played a huge role. The training programs, they do Fintech tours.
I actively participate in those.
We've done so ourselves also.
No, great.
A lot of we participate in the internship programs that are coming out from Fintech Saudi. So I believe what is happening in Saudi and the direction that's coming from the financial sector development program is a key part of why an Uber driver would mention fintech.
Yeah. No, and I think you're 100% accurate in that, and you know I totally agree with you. I have a view which is I guess adjacent to what you're saying, which is, in my humble opinion, and I mean globally, for fintech to become what I call commonly understood, this whole concept of embedding finance in non-financial services is going to be one of the key catalysts.
True.
Right? So whether it is, you know, an Uber driver or someone in healthcare or a retailer or automotive or aviation, I do think the power of embedded finance in terms of catalyzing in the understanding of fintech is going to be critical. Yes, I totally appreciate, I think the regulator and the wider environment and the education and upskilling would be great, and I think it's important, but I do think embedded finance does. Payments. What's unique about payments in this part of the world, right, versus some of the others?
I'll give you a comparison. We'll start with US, then I'll go to China.
Okay.
If you're a startup in the US, how many payment methods are you looking to enable to serve your market segment?
Half a dozen.
Really?
Well, you know, I do want I do want. Well, you mean when
the common.
So you need the Visa, the MasterCards, the American Expresses.
If you get those three,
yeah, I think you take care of most of them.
That's a good starting point.
Yeah. It is.
Let's put it out. It would cover at least 70-80%. That's one. If you go to China, how many payment methods do they need over there? They probably need WeChat Pay, Alipay, which run on UnionPay. Okay, so those are the essentials to start serving the market. Notice that this is a market where it is a little bit over 500 million, and one is 1 billion. And let's go to GCC, which is 55 million. You need a minimum in the GCC 7 payment methods, minimum, because 5 out of the 6 GCC countries have their local payment networks, which is 5, plus Visa, MasterCard, and Amex, which you mentioned for US. So it's very important to understand that. So if you are in Kuwait, KNet is the prominent. If you're in Saudi, MEDA is the prominent. If you are in Bahrain, it's Benefit. If you are in Oman, it's Omannet. And if you are in Qatar, it's Snaps. Even if you're in Egypt, it's Misa, and you have the alternative payment methods of Fawri. So the region here is very much having different preferences by consumers. That means the awareness of setting up acceptance to serve the market requires a bigger investment at the moment.
No, I do agree. I do agree. I think there's complexity, but I'm also a big believer that I think public infrastructure or public financial infrastructure in the long term is of great benefit.
True.
And great benefit to fintechs, right? I had a very interesting conversation on the couch with the chief fintech officer of Singapore, Swapnendu Mohanty, and we actually had this discussion that there has been an age of fintechs which were created who basically were playing the arbitrage in the inefficiency that existed in public infrastructure, and to solve that, right? And there was a view that while that is good and that's required and that meets the purpose, that might not be the most sustainable way, right? If you have public infrastructure and you're able to build fintechs on the back of that, you build a much more sustainable business. And you're seeing that in countries like, well, China is one example, right? But India is a very good example with UPI, sure, right? We're seeing something like that in Brazil, right? I think we're seeing something like that in Saudi Arabia eventually, with everything that Saudi Payments has built, right?
I think a lot of that will play a role with open banking. It opens up the whole framework.
I just hope open banking and open finance here are able to realize some of the potential, because I think in Europe, while it is now starting to take traction, it's taken quite a lot of time.
True.
And some of the use cases that have been quite widely accepted haven't got a lot of people as excited as they could. And there's another question there to say that should we go through this journey of open banking, open finance, and open data, right? Or should we just jump straight to open data, right? Because that's the three-dimensional view, sure, right? And I'm borrowing someone else's quote who I actually heard at the London Week. So I guess then that begs the question, right? Where do you think are the biggest gaps and the opportunities in the payment space as we talk about the GCC? You can choose one country or two, and we don't have to cover all the 6 countries. Where do you think are the biggest opportunities and gaps?
Gaps is very clear. I've been mentioning it earlier. We're very highly fragmented. Nothing is standardized. Every country runs.
But that's not going to change, is it?
I believe it will change with time. The GCC Council is actually
so they will introduce some level of interoperability, you're saying?
True, and that's happening at the moment because it's available.
But there used to be something called GCC Net.
It's still there.
Yeah, I know it is, but it doesn't get used as often.
It is being used, but we don't notice it. Okay. Why? Because if you have your card that is in Saudi, running on MENA, and you go use it in Kuwait, it actually runs on GCC Net.
GCC Net, okay.
But that's not yet available online.
Yeah.
So sure, what's going to happen eventually, you're going to see that you can pay with your KNet in Saudi, MENA and UAE, benefit in Qatar, and Oman Net in Saudi. So you would see that, and it's all enabled through GCC Net. The thing is, I think it will take time. So there is a lot of investment of sharing those networks between all of those countries that's taking place at the moment. And it will change and it will evolve in the coming years. Now, from our end, we realize that this is a problem and the market can't wait. For us, we saw this as an opportunity.
Agreed.
So how can we play a role into bringing a closer offering to someone who is based in Saudi, who wants to serve their customers in the region, or someone in the UAE, and vice versa in every country in the GCC. And that's what we did, while also having an open dialogue with the GCC. So we would contribute to the needs of what should be taking place as it gets implemented for online payments.
Okay, so let me ask. I'm gonna ask a question which is gonna force you to put a crystal ball in front of you. But before I do that, right, give me a little bit of an understanding of what makes what is the constituent parts of the flows that tap payments currently manage in terms of online versus offline, what percentage of your offline is now, tap and go versus, chip and pin.
Sure.
Is there an MPOS component which is growing or not? Give us a rough picture without revealing too much.
Sure.
Right.
So first, we're core to our DNA is online.
Yeah.
So the majority of our business is actually online.
Okay.
We do card present POS in Kuwait. We like to test things out in our homegrown market.
Fair enough.
And basically, going to online, I would say, there is a huge growth of device payments.
Okay.
It started off because a lot of the payment networks here in the region, they either have card payments or redirect payments. Even though those redirect payments are also card, but we treat them separately. And what do we do as our offering in TAP is we look at the technology that connects with those networks. We look at the payment experience that is provided to consumers by connecting to those networks, and how we can streamline the financial handling of money that comes from those networks all the way to the merchants. How can we look at all those experiences and simplify them into a unified flow, whether it is having a single API that connects all of them together, having a single report that brings them all together, a single reconciliation when you get your funds in your bank account. We try to make it very simple, but of course there's many steps to make it reach that level. Now, where do we see a lot of trends taking place with online, and similarly is happening with point of sale, is device payments. Device payments, if it's online, it's running on pass-through wallets such as Apple Pay, Google Pay, Samsung Pay, Benefit Pay in Bahrain, and there are others coming out. When those same device payments are actually taking place and POS, those are all contactless payments. So this is where we see things are heading. What does this mean? It means that card payments are there. They're just layered with another layer on top to speed up the process of authentication and having protected payments, basically.
So, Ali, there's so many players in this space now,
Sure.
right? There are homegrown players, there are regional players, there are international players, right? E-commerce is growing, but obviously it's now not growing at the same rate as it was during COVID. Right. There is still the world of offline, and you're very correct at saying that a very significant percentage of that offline world is going into the wallet segment, right? I don't remember the last time I tapped my credit or debit card. I usually use my phone, and I'm just a proxy. How isn't it turning into a bit of a red ocean?
It seems very over, let's say, populated. But we've seen that there's so much noise, but very few actually solving problems.
Okay.
If you just put aside all of the quantity that's there and look at the quality, it's just a very limited number who are actually impacting the market.
Okay, that's interesting.
That's the way we see it. That might take time to evolve because it's happening in one country, but not happening in another country. What we've noticed is that it might be a red ocean in one country, in the GCC, but go just to the neighbor, it's just a blue ocean. Now, it might seem like a red ocean, but if you put them all together, it's still not yet solved.
And so what's unique about your strategy? Are you targeting segments that typically people are not going after? Is it the way your tech works? Is it because you have the friendliest salespeople? Is it because your pricing or your commercial structures are interesting? Is it all of the above? So what's the spike here? What kind of makes tap payment? What makes me as a merchant want to speak to you? Let's put it that way.
So it starts with how we started. Startups and SMEs is where we started. It's very close to our hearts. It's what drives us and how we build innovation, because we want them to grow, basically. But we realized as we're offering and helping them grow, we started unlocking different problems for other segments in the market. So we've split our clients into various segments. Tech startups is one, SMEs is another, local enterprises is a third, fourth is a multinational regional player or global player, fifth would be a fintech. We look at those five. The offering for each of those segments is completely different than one another. And it's very uncommon to have a company that offers to all of them. We happen to have the ambition to want to serve all of them. And we believe that we've been doing so in a way where it has been adding value. Now, where is the majority of payment companies in the region focusing on? They're primarily focusing on local enterprises. There's 4 additional segments that I mentioned, which they're very much underserved. So from where we look at things, the value added part is on market segments that are not being served today by the traditional payment providers or / banks, I would say. And that's where we differentiate ourselves.
So let me ask you a straight off question, right? So there is a good reason why some of them do not target some of those customers. One of them is the cost of customer acquisition.
True.
Right. I should have introduced myself earlier, in sense, not I'm Arjun, but the fact is that I actually worked for a merchant for about 6 years, where I used to run payments for them across 8 different markets, right? And I've had several such conversations with payment companies. How are you able to justify the cost of acquiring those customers when a lot of the others are shying away? Do you do it through partnerships? Do you have something unique in the way you actually run your business development? And I'm sorry if I'm getting too deep into the conversation, but it's fascinating to hear.
Transparent for us. Well, if we were a company that focused on enterprises from the beginning, we wouldn't have been very efficient in our processes and use of technology to automate such processes. Since the beginning, that was the challenge that we wanted to solve. We realized that we were lucky that we were focusing on that from the beginning. When you look at enabling payments for the masses, which are startups and SMEs, processes are very important. How do you onboard that client? How do you get them live to accept payments? How do you service them in a manner where there are thousands and hundreds of thousands that are out there? So, and when you're a startup, you're a small team. Are you going to build an army? No, because you're just going to burn liquidity. How can you do it very efficiently? So we faced this challenge in the early days, which we didn't realize at the time. It allowed us to scale much faster than many others. A company like us that started with enterprise wouldn't be able to have that same flexibility because the cost of acquisition would be much higher. Now, what we've developed with time is that also it doesn't mean that what we've built is the right structure for enterprises, because it's a completely different game. We realized that our offering unlocked problems for enterprises, but the building of the process of relationship, of onboarding, and the legacies of enterprises and how do you build that, is completely different.
Agreed.
So what we've done in the company is we split our teams, our business teams, into two separate divisions.
Okay.
Enterprise a division which handles local enterprises and global enterprises, and the rest of the tech startups and SMEs. And you handle large companies with account managers while you handle startups and SMEs with teams. It's like if you're in a bank, you have private banking and you have corporate banking.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way we look at it.
Okay, no, that makes perfect sense. So you have not necessarily tied up with any distribution partnerships. You still focus on actually targeting and onboarding these customers yourself.
Today,
The SMEs.
like the effort of onboarding is on us, but we strongly believe in partnership.
Okay.
Partnership doesn't mean always generating leads.
Mm-hmm. No, it doesn't.
It also plays a role, but it's not always the case. But who are the main partners that we look at? Payment networks,
Yep.
our key partners, payment acquirers, payment issuers, e-commerce platforms. Those are key players.
Mm-hmm.
And banks, of course, because when I mention payment acquirer or issuer, doesn't mean it's a bank always. All of those five, let's say, stakeholders play a very important role in serving those clients, merchants, because that's what I mean by process for startups and SMEs. We need to look at all of those five because they can't, how can you streamline masses if you're not organizing the process between all of those five segments?
Fair enough. And I think it makes perfect sense. And I think the stronger you have the relationship with these five people or five types of partners, I think it catalyzes change across the entire value chain. Right. So I'm going to switch gear a little bit. I'm going to take you into the world of the future. I forgot to bring the crystal ball, but so imagine there's one lying in front of you. What do you really see as some of the trends, and I'm not going to put a number, but 3 to 5 trends, which you think are going to shape the way payments plays out in our part of the world? And you can choose this to be domestic payments, cross-border, fast, whatever it is, right? So very keen to hear a payment practitioner's perspective in terms of what are the 5 things or 3 things which are radically going to impact and change payments in our part of the world where you and I live.
I would start off with one that is very, let's say, proactive or progressive in some markets in GCC, and the opposite, where being conservative in the rest of the GCC, which is crypto. Crypto is one of the key, let's say, behaviors or payment methods, because today it's a currency and a payment method. I think that will evolve. It's good to see how that moves, and there's a lot of traction for the future there. That's
so you really think people actually want to come and use their Bitcoin to buy cups of coffee?
Maybe not a Bitcoin, but some form of crypto.
Okay.
And because Bitcoin is not yet efficient for payments.
Wow. Yeah.
But from a time processing perspective. But we already see demand from merchants that are looking to enable crypto. We do see that. We haven't done it yet, but we have seen some traction there.
Okay.
We understand also there are hypes, and now I think the hype has been much less than before, but it's still there. So that is one. 2, I would say, which is still the hype, BNPL.
Okay.
BNPL has basically a lot of traction. I would say just because of the role of paying with credit. I would be little conservative to evaluate how it will continue in a positive manner, because it needs to be within credit lines. Today it's not. So I think the companies that have played a role here, they have played a lot with the experience. So that is very important. So BNPL is another part. A third one would be not a core thing, but it plays a role into the whole experience, and we see it happening today, which are biometric payments.
Okay.
Biometric today, we don't realize it, but facial recognition payments. Today we do it with Apple Pay. And we're doing it without us realizing that it is driving payments with biometric authentication. So I think that's what's moving, and there will be always a layer underneath, whether it is going to be, let's say, a fiat currency with a traditional card payment, or a crypto, or a BNPL, laying with that biometric experience. So that will be interesting to see how they work with each other. Finally, I would say a fourth one that is, I'm waiting to see how it evolves, is open banking.
Yep.
Open banking is another important layer, which is still under, let's say, development in many different countries here in the region. And it will play a role as another rail that runs with all of what I just mentioned earlier.
So let me ask you a question, right? So I'm sure you're familiar with UPI in India.
Yes.
You're familiar with Pix in Brazil. You don't see a role for faster payments in this part of the world?
It is happening. Like, I would say today, real-time transfers, let's say, needs to be first widely adopted before it gets used as payments. Real-time transfers has been already rolled out in Saudi. It is soon going to be available in other GCC countries. The GCC Council countries are already rolling out real-time transfers between each other.
Yep.
So today we see a lot of investment on the transfer side of things. Now, once you have that set up with open banking, you might see real-time payments or faster payments. You do see it in different ways. We've seen it in Kuwait in a very interesting way. Today, there is a huge trend where transferring funds in Kuwait is actually different than the neighboring countries. It's always a money request. Today, if I would like to send you money, let's say 100 dirhams or 1,000, I would just ask you, send me a link. I would get a link from your bank. I would pay with my debit card, and you instantly get it. And that's a common practice of payments or peer-to-peer in Kuwait today, which is not yet fully adopted in the rest of the region. You see it in Bahrain in a different way with Benefit Pay, I would say. Benefit Pay is more of a similar experience as a WeChat Pay with a face of an Apple Pay, let's say.
So I can't disagree with any of the 5 or 4 or 6 trends that we've spoken about, right? Some of them are real, some of them are already here, and actually we're experiencing it. So what's Tap Payments' attitude towards these things? You're obviously observing them very closely, right? Is the intent to build your own tech, or you will look to partner and facilitate someone else's product through your ecosystem?
So let's go to what is the purpose of what we're doing in TAP? We're looking to enable and simplify payment acceptance.
Yep.
In whatever form. So if there is a new trend of behavior that is being adopted by the market, it's our role to bring it on board, put it along with our standards, keep it simple to enable for our clients. So all of those different behaviors are on our radar.
Okay.
We today, being specialized in enablement is completely different than offering it ourselves. We prefer to be specialized in enabling all of those payment methods.
Okay.
in whatever form they are.
But are you making a bet, and I don't mean the bet in sense of betting, but are you taking a bet on any of these 4 or 5 where you are proactively saying, I'm going to start working on this now because I do think that this will come. It has disruptive capabilities. It has the ability to potentially even hurt what we do today. Because see, it's always great to react, right? And you could be the most efficient person to react, but there could be someone who's faster, right? So is there, and again, I'm sorry I'm putting you on the spot, and why should I be? Because this is your own strategy. But you can even just tell me yes or no, but are you taking a bet on some of these where you're saying, Arjun, I'm already building capabilities, right? Although it's not yet proven that this will be a super success.
I'll give you an example of one that we see a lot of traction going, but we decided to do it as a partner. So in Kuwait, BNPL is yet to be regulated and rolled out. And we found a company that wants to do it. They haven't started yet. And we worked with them with the regulator, where today offering it to the market is collaboratively. Our role is to enable. Their role is to perform the BNPL. So why are we doing that? It goes back to our, let's say, mission. If we go and focus on one of those, it will distract us from enabling all of them. And if you want to enable one of them today, you would always need to work with a partner that enables you, or you need to build it yourself. I don't want to be I don't want to be hard on companies that are trying to do that. They can, but doing both is not the same as focusing on one.
Agree.
So we prefer to enable partners. That's the focus of what we're trying to do.
Yeah. So you want to build an open ecosystem. People can come, plug into you, and through plugging into you, you actually can plug it for your merchants. Your merchants can choose whether or not there's a particular service that they want or not. And I think that makes perfect sense because there's no better way to scale. You know, a smart person once said, you know, just to drink milk, you don't need to own the cow. Right?
True. True.
And I think, you know, there is a lot of sense in that. Sometimes you might have to own the cow when you're being highly progressive, but I guess, you know,
we're not in that stage today.
Yeah, you're not in that stage.
We see there is still a lot of development in the market, and it's still very early.
Let me talk about a couple of other technologies. So we're going to just shift slightly to technology, right? So you know, there's so much conversation around blockchain, and now every bit of conversation is around AI, right? What role do either or both of those technologies play? And I think it's a two-part question again in the evolution of the whole, you know, payments sector, or payments acceptance, and you know, what is Tap Payments doing about it, right? Do you really see these as heavily disruptive technologies for what you do? And if so, how are you responding to them?
They are. We haven't. Blockchain has been, let's say, a vertical that a lot has been going around it, but not a lot has been rolled out yet. We see a lot that can be beneficial when you move towards electronic assets. Digital assets plays a huge role with blockchain. So being in digital payments, aligning it with digital assets, blockchain is a very important piece to streamline the ownership of those assets and give a track on the payment side. So that's where we see blockchain. Of course, there's many other use cases, but this is what I can think of right now. If we go to AI, I think it's moving a bit faster.
There's 1,000 tools a week these days.
I'm trying to catch up, to be honest.
Well, nobody can catch up. I've given up catching up. But what I do is I spend every weekend and I've actually done this for the last 8 to 10 weekends, if not longer. I actually take one tool every weekend.
Cool.
And I try and play around with it. I miserably fail at being able to harness the power of some of these tools, but I think I'm getting better and better. So actually my mid-journey pictures are getting quite good, right? That's for change. I'm getting better at using ChatGPT, although it terrifies me what it does. And I have a 12-year-old who seems to have now heard about it, which worries me because, I would want her to be writing her essays, not ChatGPT writing her essays. But I guess that's what the future holds. But sorry, this is not about what me and my 12-year-old are doing, but on AI, right? So what's your take on AI payments? Because there are tremendous use cases, right? Me being a payments person myself, I can see. How do you see it in its initial avatars? How do you think it's going to kind of come into the ecosystem?
I think it's already happening initially with payments, primarily in risk, I would say.
Yeah. Okay.
Risk and behavioral attribute of transaction. What is happening there is how we can perform transactions in a protective manner. That's where AI is going to speed up a lot, and it's already starting at the moment. I believe one of the payment gateways provided by one of the payment networks are decommissioning one risk software into another, just for the purpose of having some AI behind it. So what we believe, that's an entry point, but where it's going to reach, I think it's a question like where is the internet going to go in the 90s when that question was given back then. I think AI is truly an innovation that will speed up things in a manner that is really hard to predict at the moment. I'm not sure. Simply as an answer.
No, and that's it. So I have concerns regarding, the ethical side of AI. I also think a lot of people have challenged that it's innovation versus compliance, but some of this innovation actually makes compliance better, right? If it's actually applied properly.
Sure.
I think where the complexity comes, at least from my perspective, is that we are seeing so many technologies at the same time, right, go through the curve so much faster, and a lot of these technologies interact with each other incredibly well, right? So if we are not ahead of the curve in terms of testing and learning and using these, the fear is that you're going to be left behind. But at the same time, you got to be able to see, separate the trees from the woods, as they say, right? Because you can easily get preoccupied, right, and go through this process of sort of, intellectual exercise without actually seeing any real benefit derived from it. So I think, businesses will need to get smarter. True. I do think that there is an element that the way our businesses will look in terms of personnel will change, yeah. And it'll change faster than we can. And then that brings another question saying, do we have access to that sort of talent?
True.
Right. And if we don't have that access to that talent, means, well, we better start upskilling and reskilling the people that we have.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can just sit back and say that, there's a magic button out there we'll press. Well, maybe there is a magic button, but I haven't seen one that'll solve that. So I find this both fascinating, but at the same time worrying.
There is one thing I would like to
please
put a comment there on how I would compare AI or where it's going, how it's going to be used versus something that we're using today. Navigation that you're using today with driving or going from one place to another. We used to use maps. Yeah. Now we rely on software that tells us where to go. Yeah. I think what's going to happen and what's tricky with AI is it's going to be the same thing. Today there are people that can use such software for navigation, but they can move without it. That's fine. But there's a huge population that can't.
Yep.
That's what scares me with AI.
I totally agree. I think the separation between the have and have-nots arguably becomes even greater.
Yeah.
So yet to be proven whether AI is an inclusive tool and whether it'll be used for inclusion or not. I had somebody about 3 years ago at an event in Dubai turn around and said that the future is between kids who will know how to code and kids who won't. And trust me, I kind of walked out of that discussion so concerned, going, if this guy's right, we're going to create a very different version of the haves and have-nots, right? No, I think there are tremendous social dynamics and social changes which these new technologies will bring back. We come back to tap payments, and I'm conscious of time, right? So where are we going next, Ali, with tap payments?
So our journey is global. So we are solving a piece right now in the region. We have unlocked a piece that we've seen demand globally, who are looking to serve their payers in the region, and we started doing so in the East and the West. And we're looking to help companies that are in the region grow globally.
Okay.
In a manner where, since such offering is available, then they can expand globally, starting from the Middle East.
And when you say global, do you mean global, or do you mean that there is actually a very large population, a large number of countries which are sort of just north of where we are, towards the east? Because I'm assuming you don't want to take on China and India, right?
Of course not.
Yes.
No. That, from that perspective, what I would have to highlight there, being in the industry we're in, payments, it's a very, let's say, specialized vertical in different regions. You don't come to a payments company that's running in Brazil and do better job than how they're doing it in Brazil. So collaboration is very important. You can do a small piece, but what bridges all of those networks together, there are a very limited number of companies today that do that globally. And they do it in a very positive way, and the value added is very strong. What we've seen, where is our value added, is how to build the connection between the region to the world and the world to the region, which is yet not offered in a very clean way. That's our approach of global. So what we mean by that is our presence in metropolitan global cities that are looking to accept payments in the region, and vice versa, companies in the region who are looking to go to those global cities. Mm-hmm. That's our perspective of global.
Okay, so this is going to be my last question, right? But I'm going to actually put a very challenging question on this, right? So I fundamentally believe in the whole concept of unified commerce, right? And unified commerce for me is sort of the next step beyond omni-channel, which means it's not just the front-end interaction, but also the back-end interaction, right? Now, you don't have to agree with that concept. You can say no.
No, I do agree.
No, right. Now, if you want to have unified commerce, and especially if you want to work with, as you said, companies, go with them internationally, help international companies here, and so on and so forth, you've got to have the offline play.
True.
Right?
True.
Because at least, you're a young guy, but even in sort of my career, which might last another 10, 15 years, whatever it is, I don't think offline is going anywhere. Like I always think
it's always going to remain.
Right? It's always going to remain because people still like to go shop. Yes, the experience in store will change. I think, card not present transactions will grow in store. You can arguably call them as e-commerce transactions, so on and so forth. What's your view as tap payments in terms of saying, fine, we've aced the whole online piece. We're as good as anybody else. We're building lots of good value-added services, and I'm sorry, I'm talking on behalf of you.
Thank you.
Right? But I'm assuming you will say that. What's your take on the whole offline piece?
So since we've been doing it for a few years now in Kuwait, we've exposed ourselves to offline. And we've done it just so we are closer to into offering such a service. How is it different than online? and how we can bring it all together. So going into offline payments, it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
We just believe there are two types of offline payments. There is the offline payment as we know it today, and there is the offline payment which is more digital, omni-channel online offline payments.
Mm-hmm.
Today, both are important.
Agreed. Yeah.
They're very important, both of them. Now, when we come and talk about the offering for traditional brick and mortar, traditional is very important. Today, this is not a core part of what we focus on globally. The ones we focus on globally are online, primarily. So if they're looking for brick and mortar setups with traditional POSs, we do it with partners.
Okay.
When it comes down to omni-channel digital payments on the go, this is something we're giving a really close attention to. We haven't done it yet. We are still doing R&D on such, and we're planning to see how we can enter that vertical in a manner that would add value that is different than what is happening today. Keeping aside that when we deal with specific, let's say, regional or multinational companies, we do care about how to solve that brick and mortar piece, but through partnerships.
Okay. So I did say it was my last question, but I'll make that my second last question. This is definitely my last question, and then I will let you go because I've kept you here for too long. In the online world, right? There's always been a trend. There has been a trend for the last 5 to 6 years, if not longer, where a number of value-added services have been bolted on, right? And those value-added services initially were sort of mocked and joked about, right? But increasingly are actually becoming the form of differentiator, right? And especially now that you introduce things like AI, which has a massive impact on the fact that you can do stuff with data. I have a very corny sentence which goes like this: if data is the new oil, payments data is the olive oil, right?
I like that.
Right? Well, yeah. Well, I'm not quite sure everybody liked it, but
No, I do.
I like it. Right?
I get it.
So what value-added layers have you guys been building? What's coming on? What's actually cool out there? I'm actually quite keen to actually understand where is this value-added stuff going?
I think a lot of payment companies talk about the data that it has, but not a lot of payment companies have yet figured out how to use this data.
Yep, agreed. And most don't know how to monetize it.
Yes. I believe most payment companies haven't yet figured it out till today. What we have been looking into data is that we've realized that it's not only on the actual transaction, it's what happens before, at the transaction, and after the transaction. I'm going to start out with before the transaction. Today, since we're looking at mass enablement for clients, there's a lot of data there. And what we have realized is that could be an offering by itself for fintechs. And that's a vertical that is not typically offered by payment companies. And we've given it attention and we've built software. We haven't rolled it out yet to the market, but that's a vertical that we have given attention to. And we have built it in a way where we've solutioned it as a product, and we're looking to pilot it in the near future in some markets before we roll it out across all markets. And that plays a role a lot with data that is connected with government services, trusted services, and plays a role into levels of risk, levels of security, and impacts also transactions, since a lot of this data has a lot of interesting value-added, let's say, fingerprints on top of what's happening in the transaction. So I believe we're in the early stage of how to utilize data. I've just mentioned one of the pieces where we're giving attention to. There's a lot more, but we're taking it one step at a time.
Great. Ali, I want to thank you. Thank you for coming
Thank you.
to the studio. I would say all the way from Kuwait, but God knows where you flew in from, because you
Actually came from Riyadh.
You came from Riyadh. Okay, well. Thank you for coming from Riyadh. I'm going to be there next week.
I'm heading to Kuwait tomorrow.
You're heading to Kuwait, right? So, right. Well, I thought I was the management consultant, but it seems like you have a worse travel schedule than I do. But no, I really appreciate you coming in and giving us a candid view. It's been interesting to understand the business that you've created. I'll be honest with you, I had no clue you guys had been around for as long as you have been. Right, but it's good to see that your business is flourishing. You're in pretty much every market that that constitutes the GCC and beyond.
Yes.
Right. So best of luck. Hope your vision and mission sort of comes to fruition.
Thank you.
And we'll definitely stay in touch. And we'll as they say, we'll chew the fat on payments. Because I need to also get a few refreshers on the whole world of payments. But with that, thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Ali Abulhasan, who is the CEO and founder of Tap Payments. And that was the Tap Payments journey. I think we heard a lot about where the business has come from, where the business is heading. He shared his views on what he believes will be disruptive. We even got to talk about crypto and the fact that people are going to be buying their coffee using crypto, which is another day, another conversation. But with that, I'll say goodbye until next week. Bye-bye.